Okay, working with older people. What might be some of the practice contexts? Hospitals, community health, nursing homes and hostels, community care, agencies, retirement villages, and financial planning. And here you'll work with the individuals themselves, families, groups, and there might be policy and advocacy work. And some of the main issues are declining physical capacity and care decisions. So here you've got a big issue of care versus control and risk assessments. So that can quite often, particularly with families that are worried or individuals that don't want to leave their home. So risk assessments, care versus control, those are some of the ethical issues that you'll wrestle with when working with older people. Some of the intervention skills, assessments for placement or community care, addressing loss and grief issues, advocating for services, supports and rights, working with families to coordinate supports and care arrangements and resolve conflicts, and organising respite. And it can be difficult because you can lose quite a number of your clients when you're working with older people, but everybody has the areas that they feel more comfortable in than others. Okay, a more sort of generalist area of practice in some ways, but needs very specific skills in others, is rural and remote practice. When I say it's generalist, quite often you can be doing many things. So when we have students that are in hospital placements, in remote areas, they find that the social worker there is a master of all skills. They have to know a lot about everything. But you can have many practice contexts. So you've got government departments, local authorities, non-government agencies. You might work alone over long distances. Yes, you can be a generalist, respond to a range of issues. It's definitely community embedded practice. And there can be dual relationships, so that's that lack of off-duty time, or it might be that you have to draw very strong boundaries between your professional self and your home self. So what might some of the skills and intervention methods be here? Well, very much generalist practice approaches, and you would transfer a lot of different skills and knowledge from many fields of practice in here because you would be working with a whole range of issues. Community development and community embedded practice is important. Technology is important if you're trying to work with people across long distances. Email, phone, video conferencing and charter planes. I'm not quite sure I'd put charter planes in the same as email and phone, but you get the idea. And you have to be innovative and creative in practice and finding solutions. So you have to be a bit of a problem solver there. So what else have we got? Income security and employment services. So it can be a large bureaucracy like Centrelink, determining eligibility, seeing clients in crisis, investigating claims. You might be in employment agencies, non-government services, church-based or for-profit organisations. There can be a bit of a tension between income as a social right or a belief that welfare demands. So it's that tension of how much, when, entitlement, government handouts, the media, the way it's portrayed, it can be quite difficult. And then there's the control aspect. You know, if you don't attend these interviews, you won't get your money. Well, how does that work when there's other things going on for somebody? So it can be very structured and it can be very supportive as a workplace, but it can also have its own tensions. So skills here, assessing claims for benefits and pensions and determining eligibility. It could be case management and employment services, technology and service delivery like call centre work to provide information, running internet sites for job ads, computerised information booths. So again, when we're talking through all of these different types of fields of practice, you might start to get an inkling where you go, oh, I don't want to do that, or oh yeah, I'd be quite interested in that, or I'd quite like to find out more. So just take a sort of a mental note about the things that are maybe flashing your interest and think about having a deeper look. Right, so we're going to have a look at substance misuse now. So this is a practice context with clear links to mental health. It is a complex area of work. Quite often it might be inpatient facilities, so community-based methadone maintenance programs, therapy, self-help, education and prevention. Now it says here that many unqualified staff work in this field, but also it's one of these areas of practice where there's a high proportion of people with lived experience as well. So I think what a common pattern in universities is that people have an experience of substance misuse, they work and share that lived experience, and then they come and upskill towards a more sort of generalist qualification, but then that helps them get different work perhaps back in that field, or they might be ready to move on and explore other areas. Not everybody, just some, from observation through different university programs. But it's a good area to focus on, to really have that debate about the lived experience or not. And I think there are some areas of practice where the lived experience is more prevalent, and there are very, very valid reasons, very valid and very good reasons for that. And these are areas that we'll explore further in class, in the intensive and on the discussion board. So, some of the interventions and skills required in this field: working in detox, working in rehabilitation, individual counselling and therapy, self-help groups, e.g. Alcoholics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, brief therapy and interventions, running family support programs, and drug education work in schools or running community campaigns. And these are just very, very small snapshots across the different fields of practice. So you may be coming up with other ideas, or you may know things or have experienced things, and I would really encourage you to share that on the discussion board. Youth work. So, practice context: multiple needs including housing, finances, family issues, education, employment, relationships, isolation, bullying, the list goes on. The context can often be informal, quite often emergency accommodation, and building of relationships is critical to this work. And some of the intervention and skills you need are an assessment of needs, programme delivery, activity-based, might be outdoor education or arts, individual counselling, mentoring and support, family work, advocacy, resources and funding, and possibly a high level of energy, enthusiasm and motivation. Sorry, I was just musing on my first practice placement for my social work degree, where I was working with young people, and for me it was quite confronting, because I hadn't really, apart from being a young person myself, I hadn't ever really worked with young people. And I remember just trying to have a conversation, and it was just like we were speaking a different language. And we got there in the end, but it was just, those relationships were critical, but they were a little bit challenging for me in the first place. Environmental and disaster work. So, the practice context tends to be that it's chaotic, limited facilities, it's crisis-driven, and it's traumatic. It can often be attached to large aid agencies or government responses, and it's usually coordinated with a number of services, which can be challenging because the services may have slightly different aims and ethoses. Environmental issues can include climate change, pollution, and conflict over scarce resources such as water and food. Now, what are some of the interventions and skills we need? So it tends to be a crisis intervention, looking at a lot of issues of grief and loss, providing material relief, community development and rebuilding, advocacy and lobbying, service planning and coordination of volunteers. And I think the key thing to remember here is that resilience comes from within, so interventions need to be community driven and not externally imposed, because that can disempower and devalue a community. And sometimes what works in one community doesn't work in another community. So it has to be very much localised as well. Okay, So, how do we choose a field of practice? Some people have needs across more than one field and slip through services and programs. So when you're working with somebody, what is the main priority? Where do they sort of fit, as it were, into the myriad and complexity of service delivery? And how do we facilitate clients to access services and access the services that they want to access? It can be a real challenge. And as workers, we'll constantly be acquiring knowledge about people, policies and backgrounds. It never stops. So you think you have a good knowledge in a certain area, you might move to a different geographical location, and then you have to learn all about the local services. You think you've got a good grasp in your area of practice, you take a job in another area of practice, then you've got a whole lot of specialised knowledge to learn. You think you're getting your head around theory, they develop new ones. You think you've got the facts to back your argument up, well, there's just been a new survey done and they've just found out some more statistics. So it's really important that we stay on top of our learning and that learning is lifelong. So, as we were saying earlier, if you're interested in a particular field, try out the electives and read some reports, look at some journal articles, read the literature. And try things out on placement. Now your placement, as I said, we ask you to keep an open mind on your placement and just remember that the knowledge and skills will be transferable. You'll never know when you're going to use that information that you found out for your supervisor on placement. You'll never know when those skills that you know, the guitar playing skills that you thought you'd never use again come in handy. So I guess it's thinking about a field of practice from the perspective of the client, but also from your interests and the type of social work that you want to practice.